I have related to Makena over time just from when I was little, right, into my adult life. And the soundscape that I am most familiar with is in the Makai area, right? So that because we don't have a lot of sand beaches, what triggers memories for me is the sound of water just kind of flowing back and forth on the ili or the stone beaches, right? So that sort of rumbling, clicking sound of stones and water together, right? So that sound-wise. And then also, when I was little, they were still using Honuaʻula for training. And so when it was nighttime and everything was quiet, because Makena was like, nobody, and it's just dark and quiet, right? You could hear the training exercises. So that's another sound for me that's familiar, is that sort of that low boom, right? And so when we were in the cleanup phase of Honuaʻula, and on the days that they did blow in place for ordnance that they couldn't move, if I were on Maui and I would hear that, that would be sort of like a trigger for me, right? So that's soundscapes. And then also from that, like feeling, like you could feel the rumble, right? You could feel it like resonate through like the house or your feet, right? But you could just, it was like a vibration. So just that feeling. And other senses with the ocean, right? So very ocean-based senses, and then going up to Ulupalakua, and then the smell and the shift. So you come from Kiave, where it's like an interesting smell, and then as you're going up to Ulupalakua, it's just cleaner, and then you start to smell the eucalyptus, right? And so being able to experience that transition, it wasn't direct up Mauka, we had to go around the island and come back, but then, just being up in Ulupalakua in that cooler space, and then looking down on Makena, right, or in the coastal area. So that's just the smells of trees, the smells of plants, the sound of the water, the sound of the ocean, early sounds of Honuaʻula training, all of that, yeah. So part of a lot of the methodology that I use, and by methodology, it's what are the physical tools that we use, right? And so these are all things that I learned when I went away to school, right? And I had the real honor and luck to have the mentors that I've had over the years, from when I went to school to when I returned to Hawaii to do internships in Kahiki Nui, and then my work with Cultural Surveys Hawaii, right? So up until now. So I view all of that as growth that has contributed to how we approach archaeology, or how I approach archaeology now, right? So trying to utilize the best technology that's available to us to be able to create the most accurate maps that we can, depending on the situation, right? So we're able to work digitally, and use surveying, like land surveying equipment, to be able to do that. And what that helps us with is that it helps us to bring it with ease all back together, to look at and then draw on mo'olelo, draw on memories of our kupuna, and draw on, just what we know innately as Hawaiians, to be able to interpret that landscape that we have just documented, right? So it's sort of these layers of technology, of method and theory that I learned on the mainland, and then method and theory that I learned when I came back from Dr. Boyd Dixon, from Dr. Hallett Hammett, all of these individuals that helped me to become a better archaeologist, yeah. As well as our kupuna that stand around us and behind us to help us to interpret that, right? So that's in a nutshell, I suppose. So, and that's actually a great, so when we look at how we have settled this ʻāina, how we as people have utilized this landscape, right? All of those things that I just talked about, the methodology and the mo'olelo, whether it's from an academic source or Hawaiian scholarly source, or from stories of folks who have grown up in the region, you know, it helps us to understand how we've moved across this landscape over time, right? From lawai'a, from incoming and creating living spaces in an environment that to most seems otherwise uninhabitable, right? But having the fortitude of character to be able to recognize the richness of this place and then adapt to that. So in the archaeological landscape, the landscape of our people, our kupuna, we see lawai'a traditions, ceremony and religion. You know, we see state level ceremony and religion in larger heiau. We see immense farming landscapes just back from the ocean, you know, in this, and I think we're going to get into it a little bit later about the McKenna field system that wasn't initially recognized by myself, but Ross Cordy, the early Bishop Museum archaeologists, were the first to sort of recognize this unique pattern of how our people utilize the landscape and the water resources, right? Because it can be very dry, but we do have a very wet season. And when it is wet, this place just turns out green, right? So it was sort of that utilizing that observation that our kupuna had to be able to put themselves in these spaces to make the most of the water when it was available, the rich soil from the volcanic sources, you know, and all of that, right? And then we see this transition into Western commerce, right? So we go from Wākahiko into just right about contact and just after those Western vessels landed and anchored just off of McKenna here, right? So you just sort of see this shift, but in the resiliency of our people, we see an adaptation to that as well. We see our Hawaiian people participating in the Irish potato trade. You see it in the Kuleana award testimonies, these claims for uala haole and uala kahiki, right? And so expansion of sort of pre-existing agricultural methods, traditional agricultural methods, to one, accommodate our uala maoli cultivation as well as growing into these other spaces, right? And so I think that that's just an amazing testament to how we have been able to adapt, not just to the land, but to changes in, just changes in society, societal changes, right? And so you see that aspect in the archaeological landscape. And then you see the aspects of ranching coming in, right? That Paniolo culture, this development of a Paniolo culture from something that was taught to our people from the vaqueros in the way back, you know, and the ability of our people to make that their own. But then you look at the ranching landscape overlaying everything, and it's also very Hawaiian, right? Because the ranch walls, these corrals, are all built in this dry stacked manner, right? And if you look at the really, really early corrals, they're robust and just very well put together, right? And so who is building these walls and these corrals? Hawaiians, right? So again, yet another transition and another cultural adaptation and another example of resiliency. So, yeah. The McKenna field system. So the unique way, or what appears to be the unique way that the Kanaka Oiwi of Honuaʻula settled the lands, right, was first identified or defined by the Bishop Museum, right, and Ross Cordy in the 80s. But what is really, really neat is as we continue archaeological study in the region, we just see that this same pattern play out. And so what they identified was referred to as the McKenna field system. And there are many, many different agricultural field systems across the ʻāina. And all of them are very specific to the landscape that they're in. So the McKenna field system takes advantage of the knolls and the ridges that are in this wahi, or across this wahi. It's a very geologically young landscape, right? So we still have these relatively steep knolls that have 45-degree like slopes, if not a little bit more oblique, but it's also very kind of windy, you know. The soil occurs in pockets in the stone, in the bedrock, and all of that. And so what we find is that we find living spaces more toward the top of the knoll, and then agricultural spaces contouring the slopes coming down, right? And then in and amongst these agricultural spaces, we have different work areas. And what we've seen is it's not just one kind of agricultural formal type. By formal type, I mean shape. Like, we have terraces, we have mounds, we have what look like pit features. We have these circular alignments that, you know, we've attributed to agricultural endeavors. And that, I think that speaks to the different type of plant life that may have been, or plant life that our kupuna were cultivating to sustain themselves, right? And so what we see now as a part of the kupuna footprint, right, the archaeological kupuna footprint, is clear, like I said, clear living spaces toward the top, and all of the evidence that comes with that, like what you would find, say, you know, around your hale, like spaces where you keep your opala and spaces where you work your tools, you know, in these living areas, activity areas outside of that, like we call them lithic workshops, and they're just stone tool places where people were making stone tools, because, you know, you get a lot of these stone chippings, right? And you don't want that in your hale. So you have like these very specific areas, and then in and around these things you have the agricultural features, right? And even another feature that we see in the Kula area, like Waiohuli, Keokea, we think that we found some remnants of that in the Makai region, and I think that I'd also seen it Mauka, is the swale agriculture. So you have these sort of drainages, and then modification of those drainages to take advantage of when we do have water in the area. Yeah. And how do we, you know, channel that water to make it, to have it be the most useful to help to sustain our people. So that's the McKenna field system. My dream for McKenna is to bring back the families that were here originally, and to have it be a space that's welcoming to those families, right? To have clean waters off of the coastline, managed ocean recreation, because that is insane. to me. I'm sure that gets in there. Because I think with managed ocean recreation in a Hawaiian way, that sees periods of rest and not a constant taking of that, then we have our ocean thriving again. We have our fish thriving again. Then we have our landscape thriving again and our people thriving again. And there's somewhere for our people to go, right? That's my dream for Makena, that the people come back to this space. Yeah. I think I would like for people to just be still, you know, like experience like stillness and appreciate that stillness. It doesn't have to be like for what's coming. I took a drive down to Maluaka side, looked at all these ostentatious buildings coming up, right? And I think I would like for people before to just appreciate the stillness and the naturalness and the subtleness of Makena, and hope that they would resonate with that, right? And engage with Makena with that same kind of subtlety, you know, whether it's our people along the shoreline with the loud music and the, you know, partying, you know, at the landing, and it doesn't mean like always walking softly, and it doesn't mean always moving in silence, but just like being self-aware, not necessarily self-aware to the people around you, but self-aware to the space around you. You know, that's what I want people to experience is the subtlety of Makena, because the archaeology is subtle. The people, they can be a bit fiery, but also subtle in how they go about things, you know? And I just feel like that's what I would want people to understand about this place. And the exchange is, you know, not so much always taking of the beauty, not so much always like, I feel like every Instagram selfie, every kayaking trip, every person who comes and parties loud and leaves rubbish behind, it's like a taking of energy from Makena. So how do you give that back, right? And that's like engaging with the caretakership of this place, right? Not just, you know, in addition to clean up, but maintaining space, right? Contributing back your energy to be able to help things grow or preserve areas. And by preserving areas, I don't mean just like, don't touch it, we're just gonna keep, but like engaging with that as well, right? And maintaining and pulling up weeds and, you know, all that kind of thing around our historic spaces. So, yeah. And that I had been spending some time with Bob Hopty, right? And we were up in the Kuahivis and old fallow sugarcane pineapple fields, right? And then moving more up into the forest reserve, right? And walking the ʻāina with him. So going up into like the forest reserve, like just on the lower limits of the forest reserve, but going through all of this former cane land. And what comes up in these disturbed areas are most resilient native plants, right, that thrive in these areas. The first things to come up when things go fallow, like ʻaʻaliʻi, ule, uhaloa, all of these plants, right? And it's the most resilient. And then there's all that mo'olelo about ʻali'i being like doesn't bend in the wind, right? And to me, that was like the perfect metaphor for our people in general, but also I feel like the people of this space, right? There is that mo'olelo about the people of Honuaʻula, the calloused back people of Honuaʻula, because they work so hard in the sun, right? In the heat of the sun, to be able to live in this space, right? And just resiliency of that, right? And I feel like that one statement that Bob Hobby shared was such a great metaphor for our people, for the people of Honuaʻula, and the ability of us to thrive in dry environments like this, where it may be hard to find water, but if you know where to look and you know what signs to look for, it's there, right? It may be subtle on the landscape, these pockets of soil, but if you know what to look for, it's there, right? And so I feel like, I just feel like this, you have to be extraordinarily attuned to your environment in these dry spaces, because you can go either way. It can either thrive or you can be thrown into drought. And how do you survive in the drought, right? So resiliency. I don't know. Why Kīpaipai? Let's see. Kīpaipai, the vision for that is to malama the spaces that we have, right? The preservation areas that we have, right? And so many times and across so many different projects, so many different developments, you know, we have these preservation areas that are the responsibility of others, not necessarily kanaka iwi. We have these spaces and we have these plans that are put forward, but not necessarily implemented in the spirit and manner in which it was written. So Kīpaipai is a call to action for our communities to come together, for the cultural lineal descendants of this area to hold space and carry out these preservation plans and make sure that they're carried out properly and implemented full scale, right? And in doing that, holding space, creating space, demanding space, right? To be present, to maintain a presence on this ʻāina through connectivity, through pilina to this area and the sites themselves. We fight so hard to save what we do have, and now it's time to take care of the things that we have fought to save, right? I recognize that we cannot save everything. I would love to be able to save all the things, but I recognize that, and you see it in the archaeological record, there's just shifts in time, and everything has a time and everything has a space, right? So I recognize that we cannot save everything, but those things that we fight to save, Kīpaipai is a vision to be able to now take care of those things that we fought so hard for. So with Kīpaipai, and I'm hoping with everything, right? We're looking toward subject matter experts. So, and by subject matter experts, I'm talking about archaeologists as well as our people who are the subject matter experts in their own way and in their own right, with the ike that's every bit as important and as elevated as a subject matter expert with a degree, right? Who may not be of this area. So with Kīpaipai, we're bringing together our oiwi subject matter experts, archaeologists in this field and who have worked in this area, to be able to share that knowledge base, right? As well as landowners, and hopefully creating partnerships with the future homeowners associations in the region, with other agencies that are in the region. I mean, this is a long-term kind of large vision for Kīpaipai, to create these partnerships with land agencies, with whether it's state parks, DLNR, landowners like McKenna, other large landowners in this wahi that we are in now, as well as our Kanaka subject matter experts, the archaeological subject matter experts, sitting all at the same table to discuss and collaborate on how best to, one, maintain these areas, two, how best to engage the public with these areas so that they can also understand, like, nothing in this landscape is a relic. It all lives, right? So by having our OUV subject matter experts, then that recognition gets elevated that these are not relics. These are living testaments to our history, right? And it's so important that finally at this place and time, our Hawaiian people, our Kanaka are at the table, leading a discussion, right? That's the most important part. And that is what I hope for Kīpaipai to sort of move into and thrive once we, get off the ground. What do I love about doing archaeology in McKenna? Golly, love all the things, every aspect of it, from like scraping myself with kiave and giving a little bit of my blood to the ʻāina because of it. I really recognize that that's a sacrifice that I have to make, crawling through the kiave and getting scratched up by lantana. And at the end of the day, I love it. I love walking the landscape and like being able to see the subtle archaeological features, the footprint of our kupuna. I love that. I love being in the high points and like just kind of trying to go back in time and imagine, like, just kind of wipe out all of the modern things, right? And like it plays like a movie in my mind, right? Wherever I am, especially here in McKenna, like just plays like the timeline plays out like a movie in my mind, and I love that. So that's what I love about archaeology.